ask Councillor Vagnini to come up and introduce the meeting tonight. He's supposed to compliment me, so that's why I'm waiting for him. Besides, I'm going to bail him out of a lot of trouble in the news lately.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out. I'd just like to welcome you here this evening. The purpose of the meeting tonight is I had people that reached out to me about some of the concerns of the location. This is not a Michael Vagnini councillor meeting. This is not a city-sanctioned meeting. This is an opportunity for the people to express their concerns. And when we talk about the chromite smelter, it's not about being against the chromite smelter. It's about the location of where the chromite smelter will be. And there's some fundamentals that have to be addressed. And as I said, this is not my meeting. I will be sitting off to the sideline and listening to your questions and your concerns after Mr. Price has his presentation completed. Thank you.
Any other instructions?
No, it's yours now.
Okay, I'll just take a couple of minutes and introduce the topic. First of all, though, I'd like to express appreciation for the many years I spent at INCO and the opportunities that they provided me in gaining experience in different fields, one of which was chrome recycling. In 1976, I participated in a research project at the Port Colborne Research Stations, developing a process for recycling nickel and chrome from waste materials. 77, we built it. It's been operating ever since, just outside of Pittsburgh in a place called Elwood City. It's called Inmetco. And I believe at this point in time, there's 6, maybe 7 by now, clones around the world. And I was the lead designer on the first plant. So they gave me the opportunity to get that experience. I'd also like to thank Autocampo. Autocampo is the name you may have heard in reference to the chromite smelter. They are the owners and operators of the one in Tornio. And they are probably one of the most, if not the most, open and transparent and good corporate citizen companies that I know of. I visited their facilities back in 1974-75, 4 of their plants in Finland. I also spent some time at their research lab in Espoo, just outside of Helsinki. Since then, I've had various dealings with them in the metallurgical world, and in more recent years, I've been dealing with their sulfuric acid division. They are a terrific company to deal with. They will do the best they know how, and they won't spare any effort in doing that. So please don't go away with the impression that Autocampo is a bad company. They will do the best. And the third, and by no means the least, the Lexington Hotel for making this feasible. I fully appreciate the effort they went to make this possible without breaking my piggy bank. So, credentials. I don't know how many of you are on Facebook, but some people that are on Facebook have told me that there are a number of people questioning my credentials. And just out of curiosity, how many of you people in here know who Dr. Kurlock is, Walter Kurlock? Okay, if you know him well, Walter was a very tough guy to work with, okay? He never once, in all the time I worked with him, questioned my credentials. Never asked for them. I challenged him on a number of things. He never once questioned them. My credentials are, I've worked in the business, I've worked in the metallurgical business, the acid business, environmental cleanup, all of those things successfully. I've never had a bad project in over 50 years of engineering. Enough about me. Reasons. Probably the biggest reasons, and if you can see it from back there, there's 2 boxes there called elders. And there's a pro and a con. The reason that that's there is because the elders in our community have nothing to gain or lose from whether a chromite smelter gets built or not. By the time it gets built, many of us won't be around. But we do have the advantage of having been through life. We've lived our lives, we've taken advantage of all the pluses, the pros. We've also suffered all the cons, the negatives. My father-in-law passed away a number of years ago from from cancer contacted through the center plant at Inco. Industrial disease is not something to be taken lightly. So we have to make sure when we build new plants that we don't leave that as our heritage to our descendants. Great. Tonight I'm going to compare Tornio, Finland, where there is a chromite smelter, to the proposed site in Coniston. My reason for comparing it is that it's being proposed to be built in Coniston. In 2018, a delegation from Sudbury traveled to Tornio, and they publicized or published these comments. And from the Sudbury Star, thank you very much for that. But they made some pretty alarming statements, in my opinion, having been in the metallurgical industry all these years. Were there any indications of higher risk, the company is a large advocate of employee safety and all the proper personal protective equipment is issued to mitigate the risk. That tells me there are risks. Chromium-6 is not part of processing at the Outokumpu smelter, and we'll get into that in a later slide. Chromium-6 is not produced by the process. Noron's processes do not create any hazardous materials out of that process. I'm sorry, when I read that, I was in disbelief. All things being equal, some of that might have minor validity. However, there, all things aren't equal. The Tornio site is not equal to the Sudbury site. I'll just take a few minutes now and quickly go through some history for you. First of all, what is chromium? We hear about chromium-6, we hear about chromium-3. There are 7 different valences of chromium, and all the valence means is the number of ions that circle about the core atom of chromium. So there's either 6 electrons, or 5 or 4 or 0 or 1 or 2. There's also 3 negative ones. However, we concentrate on 6 because it is particularly harmful to humans, plants, and animals. And we concentrate on 3 because it's essential to us living. We all need some chromium-3 in our diet, or our bodily functions won't function properly. So there's good and there's bad. And the best way I can describe this, my neighbor is involved with PetSave. And if you imagine chromium-6, bad one it is a lion. If it's in your house, you're going to keep it in a secure cage. You're not going to let it get in the living room. But if it's a chromium-3, and that's a house cat, yeah, they're therapeutic, they're good pets, they're terrific to have around. However, if you can imagine 400 house cats in your living room, you've got just as bad a problem as you do if there's a lion there. Disease will be rampant, all kinds of things will happen. So it isn't just a matter of those 2 specific species of chrome, it's the whole picture of chrome. Just as it's the whole picture of nickel, the whole picture of lead, all of these metals, you can't look at any one in isolation. To start with, maybe to put it in a better perspective, and anything in a green box is a reference that I've made to some other technical article that's already been published, been peer-reviewed, been verified as being correct. 1994, the European community, or European Union, did an atmospheric heavy metal deposition study all over Europe. One of the places they identified as having a high level of chromium was the area around the Tornio smelter. It had, and they measured this by micrograms of chromium in the moss. That area was the highest in Europe. It had 7 micrograms per gram of moss in that area. That is history, but that's important to remember as you'll see as we go through. Second reference I'll make is to a lingonberry contamination study done in Finland as well. This was carried out in 2004, and if you notice up in the upper right-hand corner, chromium is noted as 1.3 milligrams per kilogram, and compared to nickel, that looks pretty low. But the nickel and the chromium are in different units. The nickel is in micrograms, the chromium is in milligrams. If you measure the chromium in micrograms, it's 1,300 compared to the nickel at 358. So there is a considerable, it's 3.5 times as high as the nickel. This, again, Outokumpu people, they were involved in that, as well as the government of Finland. The highest points were the red arrow up on the left, which is where the Tornio, or just outside the Tornio smelter, and it's within the 2.8 kilometers that you see there in blue, and the Tornio smelter is where the blue arrow is. Again, history. In 2013, the Swedish and Finnish governments commissioned the Transboundary River Commission. The river, Tornio River, that runs through Tornio is the boundary between Sweden and Finland. The two countries got together and they did an evaluation of contaminants with sediment, which is the mud, and fish in the Bodnian Bay, which surrounds the smelter. For fish, there is no target value for chromium. However, the detection limit, depending which method you use, is either 0.02 milligrams or 0.01. Samples in the Tornio area indicate a high concentrations of 0.22 milligrams, or an order of magnitude higher than the detection level. There is chromium from the plant getting into the fish. The sediment, or the mud in the bottom of the Bothnian Bay there, the target value, there is a target value for that, at 15 milligrams per kilogram, and just outside of the Tornio smelter, the maximum of 150 milligrams per kilogram was found. The lowest value they found was 20, which is still higher than the target of 15. Yes?
How long was the plant, or what was the period of time?
That goes back into the 60s. Okay. So that indicates that there is contamination coming out of the plant. Now, the plant has changed some though. This is a paper that was published in 2017, and you may have seen reference to it in the newspapers. It has 4 authors from South Africa. South Africa exports 47% of the world chrome supply. They surely know a little bit about it, okay? The one author is from the university in Finland, and one author is from the Tornio smelter. I don't know whether it works on here. Oh, it does, great. From the Tornio smelter, Outokumpu. One is from Hatch Associates in Toronto, and one is from CanMet, which is the Canadian government in Ottawa. So we have all those authors, and what they said in their conclusion is, prove the ferrochrome production using recognized processes will lead to the formation of small amounts of chromium-6. And further on, various process steps to minimize the formation of chromium-6. Not to eliminate it, but to minimize it. And even the most ideal process will still lead to some chromium-6 being generated. Although the operability of process option was not discussed in the review, it's important to state that individual steps can't be merely strung together. You can't take one piece of the process that generates very little chromium-6 and join it to another one that also generates it, because they don't work well together. So the next process step will generate more. And since chromium-6 formation can't be totally eliminated, some chromium-6 containing waste will be generated. And they go on to say that you have to be careful how you treat this stuff. The quotation that was in the paper that there is none generated is not accurate if you believe these people. These are the scientists. And as I say, that was published last year, 2017. So before we get into a lot of detail, I'll give you an executive summary of what this all means. History-wise, contamination, well, there's quite a bit in the Coniston situation that we don't know, and I'll get to the bottom one in a minute. In Tornio, The mud was 10 times the target level. Fish was 10 times the detection level. Moss was 7 micrograms per gram. Fruits, which was the lingonberries, was 1,300 micrograms per kilogram. And another one that was done in soils with pH less than 5 came out of the Sudbury area risk assessment done in 2008. And in that risk assessment, they defined or found that 17% of the samples at less than 5 pH were greater than the 71 parts per million criteria set by the Ministry of Environment. And in actual fact, some of them were up to 1,100. I don't have a similar report from Tornio. The production rates that were in place when this was established were 50% of their current production in Tornio. And that will, the one in Coniston, when it's at full production, will be 200%, or twice the rate at which these were accumulated. Secondly, the production, the Tornio smelter is integrated with a stainless steel mill. They're all part of the same site, and you'll see that in a minute. The one here in Coniston would be a standalone chromium smelter, or chromite smelter. The importance of the integration, you'll see in a few more slides. Geography, well, the land area that's exposed to any contamination from the plant in Tornio is 120 square kilometers within a 10-kilometer radius. In Sudbury, it's 315 square kilometers within the same 10-kilometer radius. Dilution and flushing. In Coniston, we have the Wanapete River, which flows at about 700 million cubic meters per year. At the Tornio site, there's 30,200 million cubic meters of water flowing past that site per year. And yes, those numbers are right. It is 30,000 million versus 700 million. Okay. Weather. In Tornio, the weather provides a natural scrubbing system for any pollutants or particulates coming out of the plant. In here, in Coniston, that scrubbing effect will be 50% or less effective than the one in Tornio. Population that gets affected. Well, in Tornio, there is nobody living within 2.5 kilometers. Coniston, there's 2,500. Within 5 kilometers, there's about 500 in Tornio, 3,800 in Coniston, because 5 kilometers also includes Wanapete. And within 10 kilometers, it's 20,000 because now the town of Tornio is included, and large parts of New Sudbury are also included in 10 kilometers from Coniston. The Sudbury Area Risk Assessment I should comment on. That was to determine chemicals of concern. Now, chromium didn't make the list of chemicals of concern because it didn't qualify high enough. But we don't want it to ever qualify. It should never get to a level where it's a concern. So we have to look at what that means in the location. This is the Tornio site. The town of Tornio is here. The smelter and stainless steel mill is out here on the peninsula. And this is one large river delta for the river coming out and dumping into the Bothian Bay. Ore delivery to the smelter comes via the yellow line here and down and into the smelter. Very little traffic to do with that smelter actually goes through the town of Tornio. This is a aerial view of the site in Tornio. The stainless mill is closer to the front here. The smelter is back here. This is what we would call a yacht club. This is a deep water port where they receive and ship all kinds of materials. And we'll get into that later as well. This is what's called a windrose. Windrows do not indicate dust carrying distances of any dust. All it does it compares, or it shows you the speeds, direction, and frequencies. So this is the frequency. This, the yellow color, the green color, the dark green colors, those are the speeds. And the direction, of course, is whichever way the arrow is pointing. And if you take a look at these arrows, 41% of them blow towards offshore. They blow towards water, not towards land. Or 41% blow towards land, I'm sorry. 59% blow offshore. The water amount that I spoke to earlier gets very apparent when I superimpose the river flows. The Tornio River is 32 million cubic meters per day flowing out of it, right past the side of the plant. This river is 2.8 million cubic meters per day. This river is 48 million cubic meters per day. That is 1.5 times the Wanapitei River. All of that water flowing by, any particulates that do land on that surface don't accumulate there, they get washed away. They're fine enough that they will stay suspended in the water and get carried away with the currents. Interestingly, the bay currents in that area are counterclockwise. So this will all come down this side and back up. That gives you an idea of the flushing effect of fallout from that plant. So we'll now go on, and that is Tornio there. The mine site is in Kemi, which is there. These rivers are the ones you've just looked at. Once it's in this bay, all of these rivers from Sweden, and that's roughly 400 kilometers by 100 kilometers wide watershed. All of those rivers drain into that bay and flush it. The salinity in that bay is very low, even if it is a sea. Also going along with that, these are from an icing atlas that was developed to accommodate the wind turbine business. In building wind turbines in that part of the country and here, you need to know how many hours of the day or how many hours of the month you're going to have to shut your turbine down because of icing conditions. Freezing rain, building up on the blades, going out of balance, you can't keep it running. What they found in January, February, March, and it's pretty consistent right across the board, this is Tornio, and the coloration in here indicates between 75 and 115 hours per month, or 10% of the month they have icing conditions. Those icing conditions are at 100 meters off the ground. That tells you that there's winter fog. Those are not clouds, that's fog coming in off the sea or wherever it's coming from, but it's winter fog. And we'll get to the fog in a minute. I know we're going to get to a lot of stuff here in a few minutes, but be patient. This is the Coniston site. The footprint for it that I took out of the Cliffs proposal, because I haven't got one from Noront, but it's the same process they were looking at. So that is 1 kilometer wide by 1.5 kilometers long. The 2 kilometer radius, and if you recall on the Lingonberry test work, they found the maximum concentration was within 2.8 kilometers. You'll find out why when we get to the fog. So that tells you, if you're from Coniston, that tells you where you will be, and there is no one in Tornio within that radius.
Question.
Does it flow into our drinking water?
I'm sorry?
In the 2 kilometers radius, did any of that flow into our drinking water?
You're way ahead of me. Be patient. This is the Coniston site. I'm going to answer that now for you.
Oh.
This is the Coniston site. The windrows, similar to the one in Tornio, direction, magnitude, and you notice that these are darker color. That's a much higher wind speed, and the frequency of them blowing. All of them in Coniston are towards land and fresh water. We have no seawater around Coniston. Within 10 kilometers, we're into, from this direction, we're into the entire watershed to the Wanapate River. The intake for the city water supply is right here. Ramsey Lake is here. 5 kilometers touches on the edge of it. And you're into the better part of Ramsey Lake, and that's the second main water supply. Those are both the total water supply for the city. So any fallout from this plant that gets blown this way or this way, as long as, if it comes this way, we'll pollute downstream here, but the predominant winds are such that we will get contamination in our drinking water. And again, there's the 2 million cubic meters per day compared to the flows that you saw in Tornio. So how do they compare? Well, that's what they look like. As you can see, there's a lot of land around here. Any fallout from that plant is going to land back on land. Once it lands on land, it sticks there. It's very difficult to wash it away. In Tornio, most of it will land on water, flushed away. What little bit does get on land, it's a very small land area, and as we saw from the Lingonberry, it does concentrate as well. There. Those particles that are coming out, how big are they and how do they react? I've done quite a bit of work in particle collection in gas cleaning systems, and this is a standard chart for size. This is a 50 micron, 100 micron, and I'll get into how big that is in a few moments, but anything less than 1 micron, which is here, in a room 1 meter high, those particles will not settle. They will hover in the air for long, long periods of time. Any wind, they will get carried away with the wind. So anything in this size group isn't going to settle out in a room. If that size group gets into water, it will stay in suspension. And if you get sufficient of these in suspension, you have what they call a colloidal suspension. It means that you can have a lot of particles in there, but they aren't going to settle out. It will stay as a murky water. The travel distance that we're looking at, if we take 30 kilometers an hour, 50 kilometers an hour, 70, this is how long it takes to travel these distances. So if we take the 50 kilometers an hour, which is maximum in Tornio, for it to get to Coniston, it's 4 minutes. For it to get to Lake Ramsey, Wanapate, and Wanapate River, it takes 6 minutes. To get to Tornio, it takes over 10 minutes, if it doesn't settle out before it gets there. We have maximum speeds in Sudbury, Coniston area of up to 80 kilometers an hour. I took 70 because it was available. It's actually worse than this. At 70 kilometers an hour, you're almost to Lake Ramsey, Wanapate. You're well beyond them at 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. So how far they carry in those velocities depends on weight, size, and whether they contact anything else or come into contact and form part of a water droplet. Weather. And this is where our water droplets start to come into it. Any dust and as it's generated close to a body of water will rise in the atmosphere, go up, combine with the water, form clouds. Those clouds will blow with the wind, and eventually it will rain, and those dust particles will come back to land. And if they're sticky, they'll hit the ground and stay there. Secondary particles that we see in the -1 micron range. 1 micron is 1 millionth of a meter. Okay, it's very tiny. You can't see it. Those are the particles that are going to be coming out of any gas cleaning system because you can't catch them. And I'll show you that in a moment. Those particles, though, act as nucleation for water to form on. If that particle is there, the water has something to condense on, and it will form a raindrop. Okay? Now, if it's the larger particles from dust, and they come over here and land, that's not too bad. It takes, whether it's rain or snow, the wind carrying it over. However, fog reduces that time and distance dramatically. Okay? And when I say dramatically, I'm not exaggerating. This is samples of steel mill dust particles, and I collected this from 5 different furnace operations in Europe, at a large steel mill in Europe, as particles that are collected in 3 different types of gas cleaning systems to knock out dust particles. I had the samples shipped back to Sudbury, and I had them do a size distribution analysis at the Willett Green Miller Lab over by Laurentian University in 2013. That is the size distribution. 100% of them were less than 2 micron, 50% less than 50, 20 less than 2. There were none less than 0.4. What that tells you is we didn't capture any of the submicron particles smaller than 0.4 micron. Those all went out the stack. That is basically limited by the capture efficiency of the gas cleaning system. So if you have best available technology in your plant for gas cleaning, and the chromite smelter is indicated to have 110 tons per day, the biggest portion of that is going to be less than 0.4 micron. It isn't going to get captured in the gas cleaning. What does that mean? Well, this is a scale model of a 0.4 millimeter dust ball made up of tiny dust particles. They hit each other, they stuck together. This is the model here. This is 200 times the scale of a 0.4 millimeter. And when you look at the tiny particles that are in there, they are all to scale as well, according to that chart. Anything less than 0.4 microns, or actually less than 1 micron, is going to go out to the air, and you can see how much. In a paper from Germany in 2010, they studied nanoparticles, which is anything less than a micron as a nanometer instead of a micrometer, and what it has to do with droplet formation. One of the conclusions they reached is cloud or fog formation is not possible without the existence of submicron sized particles. You have to have a particle there to form for that water droplet to form around. Those particles are typically less than 1 micron. Every droplet of rain that comes down will have a particle in it. Some of them will have more than 1 particle, but there will be none without a particle. Whether that particle is chrome, whether it's nickel, whether it's iron, whether it's sand, whatever it is, it will have a submicron particle in it. So there is no ifs it will be there, it will be there. Otherwise the raindrop won't form. To show you how effective fog is at contacting those particles, this is from a paper presented by Autocampo in 2015. This is the inside of their building, and they have a snow cannon set up in plant to do dust control, to protect their workers. They've found that by generating the fog from a snow cannon, it will contact those fine dust particles, form a droplet, and it will come out of the air and make it safer for the workers. There is no doubt about that, it works. So what happens when you turn that fog machine outside? Well, in Tornio, they didn't have to. Fog is a natural occurrence there for a big part of the year. The dust particles contacting those fog droplets or fog mist is a given. That's an effective scrubber. Inside the plant, it takes it out in the distance of inside the plant. So if it goes out of the building and into the atmosphere and contacts this, that's not going to carry very far. We don't have the same number of fog days. And I'll get into that later too. But we got a lot to come. To give you an idea how important weather is. These are the winds in Tornio and in Coniston. The average winds, the peak is 50, peak is 80. This is the average wind profile over the year. And as you can see, they have lower, gentler winds. Gentle winds in the area of about 10 kilometers per hour are necessary for generating fog. At about 15 to 20, the fog starts to dissipate because of turbulence. The wind is moving it fast enough, it tends to mix with the upper atmosphere, and the fog will dissipate. Monthly precipitation. Even though Sudbury or Coniston has a higher annual precipitation than Tornio, Tornio's is spread much more evenly over the year and doesn't have the peaks or the valleys that Coniston does. That steady, everyday rain helps to purify the air as well, and we all know that. If you want a pure air, you wait till after the thunderstorm, you go outside, the air smells just as fresh as can be. It works. Nature helps us. Fog days, this is where the dramatic difference comes. 33% of the days in Tornio are fog days. Less than 18% in Coniston. And I know a number of you would argue it's a lot less than 18. Those are from the weather networks. Relative humidity. The relative humidity in Tornio, especially in the wintertime and early spring into late summer, is much higher than it is here in Sudbury and Coniston. For any meteorologist or climatologist among you, you'll probably argue that at above 80% humidity, the water droplet formation tapers off, and it does, in a pure atmosphere. It depends on having a little bit of sulfuric acid in with it. And because you don't have any sulfuric acid in the test work that they do, they determine that that sulfuric acid is missing at greater than 80% humidity. However, if you have a plant exhaust that's emitting sulfur dioxide and traces of sulfur trioxide, you will have the sulfuric acid, and you can then condense this on the particles, and it acts again as a good scrubber. This is from the 2017 paper that all the scientists wrote. In the end, they come up and they said, well, there's 4 steps that we should be looking at if there is going to be any smelter anywhere. The first one is you need to set up what your baselines are. Take measurements around site. Find out what the levels are. And as you saw on the one slide, the Sudbury area study indicated that we're already above MOE requirements or criteria on at least 16 or 17% of the samples. Where those are taken, I don't know. I haven't been able to access their paper yet. The second thing is the milling. This is a similar, beneficiation is like milling. It's like the Clarabelle Mill or the Strathcona Mill in Levac. NORAD proposed doing that underground at the Ring of Fire, doing it wet, not dry, thereby minimizing the formation of chromium-6. That's good. Okay. That is the best that they will get. It doesn't mean it's eliminated, it will just be minimized. That still has to be shipped to the smelter though. I haven't heard yet how they plan to ship it. Are they going to ship filter cake? Are they going to ship a slurry? Are they going to ship dry material? Those all come into play at the unloading if it's in Coniston. Third step, select the optimum process combinations to minimize the chromium-6. They don't say to eliminate it, they say to minimize it. However, factors such as capital, operating costs, And compatibility of process steps will be co-determining. That's why they say minimize, not eliminate. You can't string together all the minimized process steps because they won't work. You have to take some that aren't minimized and combine them with the ones that are. And waste management. As you saw in their conclusions, there is definitely chromium-6 in the waste. It either has to be treated to destroy the chromium-6, or it has to be contained in a manner that doesn't get out and exposed to people. In addition to that, that's just really talking about slag, but there's also waste material, which you'll see when I get to the metals balance. And then, of course, when it's up and running, you need a good monitoring system to keep track of it. Is that the end? Nope, not yet. All I've presented you with so far is location and climate. In a paper in 2004, Transformation of Ferrochromium Smelting Technologies during the last 10, 20 years, again, put out by Outokumpu, and just to show you the kind of company they are, I had to request this from Finland. They were very graciously sent it to me. This is what they call an ecological balance, and it's based on 1,000 kilograms per, well, not per anything, 1,000 kilograms of ferrochromium output has these inputs, those emissions to water, and a waste for every 1,000 kilograms, sorry. What does that look like applied to the proposed Coniston smelter? Well, Coniston smelter at full production will produce about 547,000 tons per year of ferrochrome. For that, it will generate 650,000 tons per year of slag. It will generate roughly 20,000 tons per year of waste. That's the contaminated waste they talk about. Emissions to water will contain up to 1/4 of a ton per year chromium. That is sufficient to contaminate 25,000 cubic meters per year, or 25 million liters per year of water from 0 chromium up to the Health Canada recommended level of 0.1 milligram per liter. It's not a small amount. The process itself requires quartz as a fluxing material. They will be bringing in 460 tons per day of quartz from somewhere. Maybe from the sand pits, maybe from Lawson Quarry on the way to Manitoulin Island, that's good quartz, but there will be quartz brought into the site. They will require 750 tons per day of coke. Coke is produced in two manners. One is what they call petroleum coke, and the other is breeze coke. Breeze coke has been produced for many, many years at the steel mills, and if any of you have ever driven past the steel mills and you see a big cloud of black smoke go up, they just open the coke ovens. Okay? Now, the coke itself, that breeze coke itself, doesn't dust. It's very good, it's very stable. However, it's also very expensive. What they're doing is they're roasting off all the volatiles. Any fuels in there that could be like our hydrogen, or propane, any of the volatiles are roasted off in that process. So all you're left with is carbon. And out of that process, it's a very stable particle. It doesn't dust. However, the cheaper product is petroleum coke. It's produced by petroleum refineries and eliminating the solid carbons from the petroleum products. That coke is extremely dusty. When they dump that, it's just like the coke ovens opening. Now, most of the steel mills have gotten much better. They do capture the dust from the coke ovens, but the petroleum coke, you can't do that. You have to put it in a building, you have to put it in containers where the wind can't get at it. So that will, one of those two types of coke will be coming into Coniston. Electrically, just the furnaces themselves will require 220 megawatts of power. The entire plant will require closer to 300 megawatts. And I can tell you that's a lot of power. That's 4 50 megawatt, 50 megawatt furnaces. Although the furnaces are getting much larger now, the newest ones in the chromium process are getting up, pushing 100 megawatts per furnace. So that would be, they would have 3 furnaces in the smelter for that tonnage. Transportation-wise, well, you just heard me tell you about the tonnage and stuff coming in and out of here. Let's look at it on a daily basis. Lumpy ore coming from the mine site would be 1,150 tons a day. Concentrate, 2298. Coke coming in, 761. Quartz, 459. 40-ton trucks, that means 58 of that, 115 of concentrate, 38 of coke, and 23 of quartz. If it comes in 80-ton rail cars, 29 rail cars, 57 concentrate, 19 coke, and 11 quartz. Outgoing product can't be ignored. That's shipping as well. So the ferrochromium product, we don't have a captive use for it. We don't have a stainless steel mill. All of that product will have to be shipped out of Coniston. That's 1,500 tons a day. If you put it in 40-ton trucks, it's 75 tons, or 75 truck movements a day, or 38 rail car movements. The slag it generates, and you saw the tonnage there, 650,000 tons a year. In Tornio, they export that from the plant. It's used for road building, rail building, and we can all remember when they stopped using nickel slag, copper slag for railway building and driveways. Waste product, 3 40-ton trucks a day, rail cars, 1 a day. Most of these are 2 trips because when you bring in a product, you have to take the empty back, get more, bring it back, or vice versa when you're shipping out. They're not the same vehicles. In Sudbury, we have level crossings. Cape Real is already a problem. There's 2 crossings in Cape Real where trains go through. We'll add 2 more trains to that crossing per day. In Hanmer, there's 3 level crossings. The same 2 trains will cross those roads. Maley Drive, there's 1. Maybe the Maley Drive extension will have an overpass of grade separation. I haven't seen the final plans for that yet. Highway 17 East, which is this crossing here, that's a level crossing, and anybody who's had to wait for a train to go through there knows how long you have to wait. The mine and smelter, the trip from the mine to the smelter in Coniston, whether it's by rail or truck, is about 1,000 kilometers. From Tornio, the mine in Kemi to Tornio by truck is about 40 kilometers. Much shorter distance. These are the typical trucks. We also have the live bottom trucks, but you guys all know what they look like. This is the site in Tornio. The Tornio smelter is here. The town of Tornio is here. The Kemi mine is over here. They ship in 80-ton trucks. They ship on the highway. Part of that road is 4-lane. Part of it is 2-lane. Those 80-ton trucks make 100 trips per day, 50 loaded and 50 empty. That's numbers as of 2015. Additionally, none of this material goes through either the town of Kemi or the town of Tornio. It bypasses and bypasses. Services, etc. Coke comes in by boat. Quartz comes in by boat. Their fuel, liquid natural gas, comes in by boat. They are a deep water port. We aren't. Our product shipping out of Coniston, if we supply to the North American market, will end up having to go to areas like Pittsburgh. That's another 1,000 kilometers. Water supply. In 2005, the water supply for the Tornio smelter and what would be phase 1 here in Coniston for a production rate of 236,000 tons per year of ferrochrome. The water consumption or water draw was about 12 million cubic meters per year. They have doubled their tonnage now from the 236,000 to 540. That's roughly where the Coniston smelter would be as well. And when you take a look at that combined with our city water supply, right now we're permitted to take 19 million cubic meters of water per annum out of the Wanapitei River. Right now we draw about 8.5 million and we average around 8.5. When that gets added to the Coniston smelter, it adds up to 32 million cubic meters per annum. It isn't allowable under the Ministry Act. We are permitted for the maximum we can take from the Wanapitei River, primarily because there is a power station downstream from that water intake, and we have to share the water with the power station. So we're at the limit now, our permitted limit. Whether we can get more, maybe. Who knows how much they'll allow us to take. Anybody that's crossed the Wanapitei River on 69 South in the dead of summer knows that it's only a trickle of water coming over the rocks. I don't know how you're going to get another 6 or 12 million cubic meters per year out of that. So that means they have to change their process. The process in Tornio won't work here. They will have to go to closed water systems. They will have to put in massive cooling towers. Cooling towers generate fog. That site is very close to the Trans-Canada Highway. It's very close to the town of Coniston. So that tells you what can happen with that. The executive summary I supplied you with at first, this is a more detailed look at it, and I won't bore you by going through all of this stuff. But two big questions right at the beginning. Have they already decided on an autocouple process? There are 4 different processes out there that are amenable to smelting chromite. The Primus process, the Mintec process, autocouple, and I forget what the 4th one is. They all have different operating conditions, but they all generate the same type of problems. But if we're just looking at autocouple, we don't know what the conditions are for those other processes. So unless we're absolutely sure that Norond is going to go with the autocouple design, saying that Coniston's an ideal location is meaningless. Yes?
Can I just ask you, is autocouple the most expensive design of all of those 4?
Depends who you ask. If you ask Mintec, they'll say yes. If you ask Primus, they'll say yes. But if you ask autocouple, they'll tell you that the Primus is more expensive. It depends on whose process you're buying. And they will all compete for that market. Okay? It's like buying a car. It depends on how bad they want to sell that process. Okay.
Is one safer than the other?
That's a good question. Depending on the amount of money you spend, no. Depending on how little you want to spend, yes. And what I mean by that, if you're going for the low bidder, you better be looking for where they're cutting out some of the safeguards. Okay? So it's like anything else. The guy with the low price, what isn't he giving you in order to cut that price? Okay? So you got to be very careful on the specifications you put out. Those are just some of the general ones. I've already talked about the climate, the geography. One other that I didn't mention is that the Tornio smelter is 3 meters above sea level. The Coniston is 260 meters. And you say, so what? Well, so what makes a lot of difference in an operating plant. Elevation affects your combustion efficiencies, it affects your chemical reactions, it affects almost everything you're doing in a plant. This plant in this location will not be as efficient as the one in Tornio. So we're going to have to find smarter ways to do it in order to be competitive. Okay. How you do that, I'm not quite sure.
Question.
I haven't looked at that yet. The fog days, they have roughly twice as many as we do. Precipitation days, raining days, they have almost twice as many, even though their rainfall is less than ours. And the wind speeds, they're in perfect average for fog generation. We're at the upper limit when fog starts to dissipate.
When you say the water will react differently, different chemical reaction, is it because the sea level water boils at 100 and up here it boils at about 95, 94 degrees Celsius? Is that
No,
something what you mean?
All the reaction efficiencies, fuel efficiencies, are dependent on available oxygen.
Mhm.
And at the higher altitudes, you have less pressure, so you have less oxygen per cubic foot of air that goes into your process. So you have to push more air through to get the same reaction. At a lower altitude, the concentration of oxygen is much higher per cubic foot, therefore it's much more efficient because you don't need as much air.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Price, hold the questions, possibly.
Yeah, don't ask any more questions. This is my neighbor's favorite slide. If you remember at the beginning I talked about cats. Well, it's true. That animal, you gotta keep caged. That's essential to the health of the workers, it's essential to the health of the community. And by and large, they pay a lot of attention to that and do a relatively good job. Is it perfect? Nothing is perfect. However, even the best one, the guy in green, when he's combined with all the other ones, and in sufficient quantities, are bad. So we need to keep them all in a cage. You can't afford to let any more than absolutely necessary get out of the cage, or it's hazardous. It's that simple. Okay, Coniston site versus Tornio site, I think I've demonstrated fairly well that they are not equal. You cannot take the Tornio plant and set it in Coniston, say, hey, there you go, it's just as good. So how will these differences be addressed? And who will be addressing them, and when will they be addressed? We haven't had any idea. We don't even know whether they will get addressed. Will we be able to stop promotion of the Coniston site or suspend it until they do get addressed? Are we going to go out and say, yeah, we want your smelter here, and we have no idea what we're getting? So at this point, and I do this type of thing, or I've done this as part of my living over the years, this is what I would call a pre-feasibility study. If I identify enough things of a serious nature that says, hey, you better be looking at something else, then you look at something else. Before you go into all the work of doing the engineering, getting all the permits and doing all that, if there's enough bad things at this stage that you want to look at something else, you better be looking at something else. Building a smelter, and I'm not commenting on what anybody at the city thinks, but building a chromium smelter, a chromite smelter, in the heart of a residential subdivision, in my mind, you do not do. You just do not do. That is not the right thing. Now, where do you put it? Okay, now, you've already asked your question. Okay. Councillor Vagnini is going to moderate here.
We'll just go down the roll here, Dennis.
So you're telling us that the pollutants act somewhat like sulfur? So we will we'll likely wind up with pollutants on the surface, with pollutants in the ground, with pollutants in our drinking water, in our runoff. We're going to stress our infrastructure. We're going to increase demand on power, on water, which means an increase in our cost of both. For what benefit? And who is going to clean this up after the lifetime of this plant? And how many people are gonna be working there? And just like the slag that we sent coast to coast, lining our rail beds, that's leaching heavy metals into the water from coast to coast, an environmental disaster. What about the infrastructure? What about all of the transportation routes for all of this material? We have to think about other people too. I can't see this being a benefit to anyone except corporate.
I can speak loud enough. So I'm curious, when they put the fog into the plant in Finland, and they're precipitating the particulates out into water droplets, what do they do then? Flush it down, wash it down? Like, where does that water go that's now contaminated?
Maybe I can use an example right here in town. They use these fog nozzles underground in some of the mines. Those water droplets containing the particulates get you into the mine water, you pump the surface and go out to tailings. Or in the other mine sites further out, they go into the wastewater from the plant. These fine particles, there's really very minimal that you can do to take them out of the water. You have to add coagulants, you have to do all sorts of thickening. That generally is not done on that quantity. Yes.
Yeah, I think I can talk loud enough too. In this environment, we're in an acid environment, which is, from what I understand, good for persistence of chromium, hexavalent and chromium. In the tornado, it goes into the ocean, and most of the ocean's around a pH of 8, isn't it? Although I don't know.
No,
what
the Baltic Sea and the Bay of Bothnia, where that's located, the pH runs closer to about 4.8 to 5.
So I'm surprised that the other countries like Sweden and that aren't complaining about the pollution from there.
Because they're doing it too. But seriously, when you take a look at the water quality in the Baltic Sea and the Bay of Bothnia and Baltic Gulf of Bothnia, there's a major effort underway right now in all of Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, all the countries along there, to try to curb the acidification of the sea, of those water bodies. And that's a major undertaking right now over there.
There's another aspect of this we might. Right now, chromium prices are suppressed. There's something like 13 billion tons of chromium ore already outlined. If this thing does get in, they're going to run into financial trouble. Then they're going to be begging the government for support. We're
Yes.
going to lose in another way. It looks like an economic sinkhole. I actually think that they're not going to go ahead with this because it isn't economically viable.
Well, you may be quite correct. If you think about it, they say that it's roughly a 20-year supply. And they're talking about building a $1 billion smelter refinery for 20 years. Now, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If you're going to invest that kind of money, they're either expecting much longer life ore body, or they're not serious about building a smelter. One of the two.
Or they're possibly looking at importing ores from other countries.
No, because to import them to this location, the transportation would be just horrendous.
Oh, I understood that the economic zone of the smelter is the world.
Well, right now, if it's built here in Thomaston, it's 1,000 kilometers from the mine site, and it's another 1,000 kilometers to market. Well, in Finland, they take the ladle of hot material from the chromite smelter over and dump it in the furnace into stainless steel.
They've got a tremendous advantage there, which means that the times are tough. We won't be able to sell our chromium then.
It's going to be difficult. The other thing, and I didn't put it in this presentation because this is already long enough, but the other thing is the electricity cost in Finland is 65% of what it is in Ontario for industrial users. So you're saving 3.5% on electricity, and that's a big power consumer.
And if your demand goes up, your price is going to go up.
Right. Now, in South Africa, the producer, the exporter of 47% of the world chromium supply, free world chromium supply, their power cost is 60% of Ontario's, which is even lower. Their labor costs are a portion of ours. Their chromite mines, compared to their smelter, are within spitting distance. They're on the ocean. So I really have trouble from day one, and I've mentioned this to the councillor a few times, I really have trouble from a pre-feasibility stage understanding how we can ever build a smelter here. We'll go back to this side first.
Hi, I'm Dave Belly. I live within that 2 kilometer range. I got 2 beautiful kids there would like to see anything happen. Now, have you presented any of this to the mayor or any of the other city councilors?
No, I haven't, and I doubt if I will be able to. I've made these type of presentations on Bailey Drive, on the fire optimization plan. Council would not hear them.
But why not? Why wouldn't they be open to an objective?
I can't understand, I can't answer that.
That's 'cause
But
they
even
weren't-
if they did allow me to present, they limit the presentation to 5 minutes. I cannot present this in 5 minutes. The gentleman over here, I think, is next.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. Developed by lots of discipline on the floor. That's helpful. The thing I wanted to question is, has any of the 2 major mining corporations in Sudbury, have they come forward with any interest in this project? I'm talking about Vale and Vancouver.
I doubt very much if they would.
You haven't been approached? Or?
No, I don't work for either of them.
No, I know you don't, but I thought they might have come forward.
The chrome industry doesn't really suit the nickel copper
It's a
industry.
totally different animal, eh?
Yes, it's a different process entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do we stand to make?
The lady at the back.
I'm from Coniston, and we're considered a brown field. So M3 zoning or industrial, we're already contaminated.
Yes.
So what I want to know, when these particulates hit the ground and the water in a contaminated area, are they going to react more strongly to become a chromium 6 as opposed to Tornio?
I'm sorry.
Tornio, as opposed to Tornio, like, are they contaminated the ground? Like, I don't understand why they want to do that.
Okay.
Will it be worse because of the existing age?
Yeah. like,
Well, yes, it
will
will.
react with the-
Everything is relative to what's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and as I indicated in a number of those samples that were taken by the Sudbury area risk assessment, 17% of those samples were already above the criteria for the Ministry of Environment. Where those sites are, I don't know. I haven't accessed their full report yet. But it's not hard to imagine that they're close to these smelters. One thing that, and I know there's a lot of concern about hexavalent chromium, and there should be. Okay, it should be treated like any dangerous chemical. Okay, however, you have to understand that there is safe use of it. Okay, safe use of hexavalent chromium. One example is any aircraft that you get on of any size, any jet airliner, the airframe in that is coated with hexavalent chromium before they do the final paint. Within a very short period, it reacts and forms chromium-3. Okay, but to apply it and to prevent the corrosion in those airframes, they use hexavalent chromium. For many years, and the Aaron Bakovich story is based on this, for many years, hexavalent chromium was added to cooling water systems to prevent corrosion. Pharmaceutical industry, but it has to be done under strict controls. Okay, it's very difficult to have those strict controls when you're in an arc furnace that's spewing out at 1300 degrees C. Okay, when you're casting molten metal at 12 to 1300 degrees C into an open mold, it's hard to contain those. Okay, so it does require a lot of work. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done safely, but you can't let your guard down. Whatever they're doing has to be monitored very closely. The gentleman on the left.
So in a process of any type of ore body, I'm just trying to figure out what the waste is at the other end, because you've got a lot of materials that are going in. You've got water, you've got ore, you've got coke, and as we all know, at the end you've got a very small finished product.
Yes.
So you've got a lot of either slag, is there slag waste?
Yes.
And you've got tailings waste. Okay? Now, I've had the opportunity to work up at the Valley site and the thing that they call the tailings pond,
Yes.
say, which when we were kids, we used to be able to see it. It was just a little wee pond. The top of that dam now is 58 kilometers to drive around the top of it, and it's 95 feet deep. Okay? It leaks all over the place, everywhere, because they use rock to build a dam to contain tailings that eat rock. So the thing leaks like a sieve. Okay? On top of that, you have a process. Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with aquifers and the way water travels through rock. Now you have a process where you're mining and you're causing fractures in rock. Okay, when you have a busted water line, okay, out in an area where there's earth and soil, that water line busts, hydrostatic pressure will push that water up to the surface. In a fractured rock body, okay, I'd look for leaks. All you guys remember when the water was freezing on David Street, down on Howie Drive, 2-3 days a week, we looked for leaks because the pipes were in, I'd look for leaks for days in rock. So as soon as you start blasting and fracturing the rock, water will always find the easiest route to travel. And in the mining process, okay, what you've got is you've got contaminated water, okay, and you can go to the Laurentian University and the Francophone students are monitoring it. 35 kilometers south of the city, in the aquifer, we've got contaminated water with traces from the tailings pond up in Sudbury. So the water's already contaminated. All right? Now with these tailings, okay? Tailings evaporates, so there's obviously gonna be chromite in the tailings and in the pond. And there's gonna be evaporation. What are the studies done on the evaporation of those tailings, and how does that product become airborne? Because most of the people in this room would remember as youngsters what it was like to drive back and forth through Coppercliff when you were 10 years old or 9 years old.
Yes, they haven't had to deal with that in Finland because most of the milling and the tailings are kept underground. That's what Norrond are proposing for the Ring of Fire as well. What the other claim holders up there plan to do with theirs, I have no idea. In areas where that is an issue, though, is in India. And in India, it has become a major problem. And they are now having to clean that mess up over there. India is the second largest producer of chromite in the world. However, almost all of theirs is used domestically. It's almost all used internal to India. Kazakhstan is the third largest. They export most of their chromite ore to smelters and refineries in Europe. And the tailings, again, those are concentrates they're shipping. There's very little tailings coming out of it. It comes out of those smelters as slag. So it's bound up mechanically as and most of them granulate. So you get beads of this material, hard granules like there used to be out on mine. That's granulated. Or if you go up to Glencore's smelter, they granulate all their slag. So these are small beads, they're much larger than the sizes I'm talking about. Okay? And those don't flow through rock scissors, the granules. The plants will pick up, that's a good question. Typically, plants will pick up nanometer size particles. Nanometers is 1,000th of a micrometer, which is 1,000th of a meter. Okay? So it's 1,000,000th of a meter. Plants will pick that up, and in fact, if you go out in areas of British Columbia, they are now prospecting for gold based on gold content in some of the plants. Okay? So, yeah, plants will pick it up, but it has to be very fine material or a dissolved material. Like, yeah, if it's in solution. Metals don't go into solution very easily.
The gentleman right here.
Economic benefits, primarily jobs. We've seen some research that suggests the job numbers that the city has mentioned are somewhat generous. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, they're talking, I think, 300 jobs.
Right.
And 300 jobs is attractive no matter where you go, okay? However, when you look at the larger scale of things, if there's a safe place in Timmins or a safe place in Thunder Bay, and it's not safe in Coniston, those 300 jobs are still there in Ontario. So are we going to be selfish and say we're willing to risk our health?
No, but is it really 300 jobs?
That depends on the process they use.
I'm just saying, we see all the problems here. I'm not sure the benefits are anywhere close to what the city is suggesting.
Well, there's two aspects to it. They say 300 jobs, and I'm assuming they're talking within the smelter. And then they talk about developing the mining services industry. We already have one of the most thorough mining services industry in existence on the planet here in Sudbury. We already have the contractors that know how to service mines, and they do it very well. They export their products around the world. So that's not going to develop on account of a chromite smelter.
Gentleman, sorry, Lionel, gentleman back here.
Yeah, it's a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's two issues that I see just from a chemistry perspective. And the first is that you have your species, which is chromium-3, and you have all the other species, and you have chromium-6. And in nature, that's an equilibrium reaction, which means chromium-3, a certain amount of the chromium-3 that comes out into the atmosphere will become chromium-6, and it will probably be in a range of somewhere between 3 and 8%.
Actually, no, the natural progression is from chromium-6 to chromium-3.
But if you have 0 in the water, let's say I have water, and I take all the chromium-3 and I put it in there, and I have no chromium-6, it's going to go to chromium-6
No.
because there's 0. It always goes from a high concentration to a low concentration.
No, it will go to a stable state, which is the chromium-3. Believe it or not.
It depends on the pH of the system and the other things that are in that system.
Well, yes, but what happens is the chromium-6 won't form due to the oxidative nature of the surroundings. And in nature, there's sufficient oxygen around that will oxidize anything above a chromium-3 back to a chromium-3. So chromium-6 is not a natural state. It's like iron. Iron oxide, FeO, is a natural state. Iron isn't. Okay? And when they talk about half-life, the half-life is how long it takes. If you take iron and separate the oxygen, it's how long it takes for that iron to get back that molecule of oxygen to become its natural state.
So you're saying that if I put chromium-3 into the lake water, a kilogram of it, you get no chromium-6 from it.
You shouldn't, no.
Because, like, at one point they thought, like a long time ago, they thought that mercury was safe, and in its natural form, it's okay. But then when I put it in the ocean, it becomes mercury chloride.
Yes.
And mercury chloride is toxic.
Yes.
Okay? And the plants in the ecosystem is what created that mercury chloride.
Yes.
So what you're saying is that what I'm saying is that nature's a very diverse organism.
Yes.
And it's capable of a lot of chemical reactions that are unforeseen by the mathematics of our mankind, because we're talking about billions and trillions of chemical interactions, not just the ones we can imagine in our mind.
Oh, yeah, no, and I appreciate that. All I'm saying is they found no evidence of it going from chromium-3 to chromium-6 on a natural basis. That when it gets to chromium-3, that is its stable form, just as iron oxide is a stable form of iron.
I read some papers before that, when I did the research on this about in 2012, when it first kind of bubbled to the surface, and there was indications in those papers that it could go from chromium-3 to chromium-6. But what I'll do is I'll email it to you.
Yes, it can go there,
Yeah.
but that is not a natural condition. That's a very unusual condition.
But it's always good. Like nature always flows from a high concentration to a low concentration.
Yeah, but this isn't high. This isn't a concentration.
It's soluble in water.
Okay?
It has a certain level of solubility in water, right?
No. No, the chromium-6 is soluble, but the chromium-3 is less soluble. But it's not a matter of concentration. It's a matter of how many electrons are circling around that atom. Okay? And that is different from a concentration. The 6 does not...
Yeah, no, I understand that piece. It's just a transfer. You know, when you have one species, you're creating a second species from it. So
Yeah.
it depends. Like, let's say you had more magnesium in the environment, or more, et cetera, as a combining factor to create chromium, this other species of chromium. See, as you have other binding partners, you can create other species.
Yes, but those are binding with... Let's you and I get together and we'll go through your paper.
All right, I'll
Rather than
find
tying
out
all
if I
these
can,
people
I'll
up.
email it.
Okay.
How many jobs did we get at the taxation center that were transferred to Sudbury recently? Approximately 1,000? How much money in pollution did that cost us? If we're going to spend money promoting.
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Lionel and then over there. Lionel first and then, sorry.
We couldn't add on what Thomas presented. Absolutely fabulous presentation. But there's an opportunity for everybody. If you've got time, we hear the publicity. A couple of weeks ago, I was at elementary school science fair. And there's this young grade 8 student from Llewellyn. And she had done a science project looking at heavy metals. And Sudbury is contaminated with heavy metals, copper, nickel, goodness knows what else. And she doesn't know anything about chromium, because I asked her, okay? But her focus was on nickel. One only contaminant that she had time to research. The fact of the matter was that the heavy metals that she identified with her research influences the ability for people to take advantage of medication that they're given. So you may wonder, you could do an epidemic, whatever you call it, study of sicknesses in and around the region. And there has been some studies, certain types of cancers and illnesses that have been identified in our area. But what she zeroed in on, and I emphasize the fact that we've got everybody down at City Hall and God knows where else that wants to have this smelter in Coniston, and yet we've got a grade 8 kid who is zeroing in on the nuts and bolts of the effect of further contaminating the earth, because when the chemicals, the dusts and stuff like that, migrate into the groundwater, we eat the food, eat the berries, drink the water. Now, I assume she's going to be presenting at the regional science fair at the university. If you get a chance, go and see it.
or be a councillor and senators don't see it. The fact of the matter is that what Tom is identifying is like the cause and effect. And so therefore, there's all kinds of work, research. I worked at Laurentian and saw the research on heavy metals. And this is what can happen. It doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be doing anything. I worked in uranium, and you can contain the runoff and all the gas and things from uranium, and you can probably do it from chromium. The fact of the matter is that you have to be sure that the gatekeeper knows what the heck they're doing. But anyway, look out for the date for the regional science fair, and this delightful young girl, grade 8, okay, if she can figure it out, well, maybe a few other people can.
Maybe
Thank you,
just to give an example of what Lion was talking about, iron is a common substance, and we all know what happens if you have too little iron in your blood. You get anemic, you don't feel well, you have no energy, etc. But what few people know and understand is that if you have too much iron in your blood, it's fatal. And people who get blood transfusions on a regular basis have to have their blood checked for iron content regularly, and if the iron content gets too high, they have to put it through a process to reduce the iron. A friend of mine's wife passed away from exactly that. Her iron level was too high, and she died from it. So, as Lion was suggesting, when you get things chemically out of balance on either end of the spectrum, you've got to be very careful.
Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
I also live in Mountain, but I'm up on the hill, so I'm very close to where this is proposed. I had sent a letter to my mayor and sent him a note about this. He emailed me back saying, "You're outside in 2.5 kilometers, don't worry about it." So that, and they're addressing it, they're looking into it. Well, I'm sorry, you're not looking into it well enough. Thank you very much.
I understand, just sorry, qualifying whether or not the mayor should be here or not. Yes, I mean, it was open to everybody, but this was not a sanctioned council meeting or city meeting. This was because everybody reached out to me. We have people actually that have come from outside the city tonight to be here, just to hear about what's going on. So this has nothing to do with mayor and council. This was Tom Price doing his presentation, and I guess I hosted the meeting, if you want to call it that.
The education is available right here. It should be taken part of.
Yeah.
I'm from Coniston as well, and I was at the first presentation at the community center in Coniston. I sent emails and asked my questions and got not satisfactory answers to my questions. What I want to know now, the proposal to have the plant in Coniston, it's already been put forward. We don't know if it's been accepted or not, right?
Correct.
Thunder Bay, Timmins, St. Marie, I've heard of several other locations that have put in proposals.
Those four, or those three besides us.
What do we do now? We have this information, we have Rose's information. Now, what do we do now? What do people from Coniston do?
Is there a
Who
group?
do we go to? I went to my counselor and got not satisfactory answers.
Organized.
NORA said one of the most important criteria is local community support. And if we have local community resistance, that may be our best hope for stopping this.
That's a good comment. And to your question, and to Tom's presentation today about the fundamentals are missing in that 4-stage chart, that has to be addressed. And I think when I came out and I spoke out about it, because I had one individual that wasn't even from Coniston approach myself and another counselor and brought out all this information, and this was a while back, I think about a month ago. And after that, I said, Tom, I need to understand all this. And the more and more I understood, the more and more I'm not against a chromite plant, not at all. And I've been misscripted on that, but What I am against is location and constant based on the fundamentals that have not been addressed at this point in time. And that's the concern when we look at a presentation that Tom has seen, that has not been addressed.
I'm not sure that I want it anywhere in our region.
Yeah.
Really, where are we gonna put it that it's gonna be safe and it's not gonna affect our waterways and it's not gonna affect, like where's it gonna go? You want it lively, Covercrest? Right?
Originally, it was slated for Moose Mountain. So, sorry.
I just wanted to say that we have a petition here tonight if you're interested in signing and giving us your email address. We're looking at possibly doing lawn signs once we unthaw a bit. Hoping to ask individuals to pay for their lawn sign and then, you know, you'll get it and, Parachrome, stay home, it's gonna say something.
What's the group?
In this, yeah, pardon me?
What's the name of the group?
This, what is it? SaveConiston.ca. We're online. There's an online petition, but we have a paper petition here too.
Do you help Save Sudbury too?
Save Sudbury.
Well, that's what I'm saying, it's all the community. So like, if we can get lawn signs all around Ramsey Lake. Shows
Save Coniston start.
I got my first kiss at Baby Lake. Let's Save Coniston.
What I would suggest is doing a petition for in the city may not accomplish much. But what may accomplish far more than that is if you do the petition, don't word it such that you do not want a smelter. Word it such that the proper steps have to be taken first before you can agree to locating any smelter in Coniston. Then send that to Noront or take it. You can copy the city, but let Noront know that you're not prepared to have them as a neighbor unless they do their homework. Now, keep in mind, Noront is an exploration mining company. They are not a smelting and refining company. They are probably as much in the dark on a lot of this stuff as many of the people here in the city. So they're going to judge by the advice they get from their consultant, which appears to be Hatch Associates, from Outokumpu, who appears to be their process of choice. Now, I doubt, in fact, I would almost bet that Outokumpu has not looked at the situations that I have. So, rather than just turning it down to the hand, make your petition such that until the proper steps have been taken to address these issues, you do not want the smelter in Coniston. Okay?
And one point about if you are going to do a petition, the city, and you are going to present to the city, they would like a handwritten one, not an online petition.
Okay, so they want paper.
Yes. This gentleman, and then yourself, sir.
I'm Dr. Richard Denton. I used to be the mayor up in Kirkland Lake and helped to defeat Toronto's garbage going up there. Two things. One is I think education is very important, and Tom, you've done a wonderful job here. Are your slides going to be available, or can you put that up?
I can put it on a PDF. It's going to be a very large file.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Could we put it on the safe?
it's being live streamed right now. So, do you get a recording off live streaming?
Yeah, it's being sent to Greater Sudbury Politics, which is the public page. I can share it publicly and tag you in it if you would like.
Yeah. So we can share it publicly on YouTube.
Because that certainly would be good. And then I think what it all comes down to is money. And so if you can prove that situating the smelter here in Coniston is going to be not economically feasible, then they're not going to do it. And so if you start pointing out that there's not the water to do it, there's not a lot of the other things that are here to do it, then it's not going to happen. So that's where we need to go. When we defeated Toronto's garbage, it was neither Toronto nor the proponent wanted to take the liability. And so you therefore need to make the liability of this greater than the benefit.
Just along that line, does anybody here know where the largest source of gold in Canada is?
I think people should remember what happened to Silver Lake in
No,
Killarney.
no, just, does anybody know where the largest source of gold in Canada is? No, it's the Toronto sewage system. Yes. It literally is the largest source of gold in Canada.
Sir?
I appreciate your comment as Councillor Clegg. Discussions with my councillor, I'm told that the city's position basically is that this is out of their control. It's a private deal between Noron as a proponent and Valet who's prepared to sell them the land. There's no rezoning required. The city has no input from this point forward. Is that your understanding?
We never voted on it, unless I fell asleep at the meeting that we voted on it. So that's why I'm out. I want to listen. From the first time that I heard any of the information that was coming forward, and I'm seeing more and more. The information that you see on these slides here, I would love, if anybody had an ability to rebuttal to them, I would like to know. Because if I'm going around and I'm looking at the data that Mr. Price is presenting and talking to that, and if that's incorrect, I would like to know.
That's
So,
my concern too.
I would like to know as well.
The litigators in the Brockovich case are receptive.
Against us, if we use the information here, is that the question would be, how much of the pollution at the Tornio site is historical relating to ancient smelting processes that have all been and how much of it's related to the fact that there is the stainless steel facility right there, which will not be the case. If we start using these figures and get that thrown back at us, we sort of stop.
No, essentially, the particle size that I mentioned is the submicron particle size doesn't really change. Even with best available technology, to get that submicron particle size out, you have to do, for example, in water, you have to go to what they call reverse osmosis. And for every gallon of clean water, you throw away 10 gallons of contaminated water. What do you do with the contaminated water? Okay, so that's just in water. Now in air, trying to get those submicron materials out, you also have to get into a similar type of collection system where you will do the best scrubbing in the world. You'll follow that with electrostatic precipitation. You'll then dry it and you'll put it through a bag house with very small pore size on the bags. That's all very, very energy intensive. That's going to make the electric furnace look like a small consumer, because it takes pressure drop through all of those stages to get those particles out. Now, the numbers that you have, they're the only possible numbers that anybody could argue with. One would be the water demand, because you can do the water differently. It'll cost you more money. They use a once-through system. They pump it out of the river, through the plant, and back into the river. Okay? We don't have that kind of water. You can't do that. Okay? So they'll have to put in a system where they make up water from the river, put it through cooling towers, and what they lose in evaporation, they make up from the river. So that's one area where it'll be different. The other area where it'll be different is when you get into these best available technology particulate removal systems, they are not cheap. Okay? They are very expensive. For example, and maybe some of you here have worked with bag houses before. Bag houses are a filter, cloth or fabric filter, that the gas passes through, the particulates stay on one side and the clean gas comes out the other. But what comes out the other side isn't clean gas. It only takes out maybe 99%. The small particles stay there. and I've fought with Inco for many years on this. The clean side of the bag house they always talked about. Well, the clean side of the bag house has a very fine material that's the most easily disturbed and the most easily ingested into your system. You can breathe it in and not even know you're breathing it in. Once it's in your lungs, those particles can get into the air sacs in your lungs and infect you. And that's what happened in some of these lung cancer cases from sinter plants. It isn't clean. It's a misnomer. It's just finer particles. You've taken out all the big stuff. Okay? So I'm willing to sit down with anybody on that and talk about it. I actually hold a patent on a bag house, so if they want to talk about it, we can go at it.
Knowing the risks for this, do you think that they will actually be able to get an underwriter to cover the risks that they must, the liability risks of building this plant?
Well, these things are always a problem because the risks aren't immediate. Okay? I can assure you that if they build that plant, you won't see the damage from it for 20 to 30 years. So that's not the issue. The insurance company won't care about that. They'll care about the accidents, the physical damage, if a guy breaks a leg or hits his head. That type of thing, it isn't going to happen for 20 to 30 years. So they'll have a new policy by then. That's the reality of it.
Mr. Lindsay, and first, John.
Well, if we'd be able to answer this, Bob, I'm just wondering, it seems strange that the last time this came up with respect to Capriol and the establishment of a smelter in Capriol, that was just before an election. Right now we have this Coniston situation. It's strange that we're in an election year. You know, how much electioneering is going on with respect to this? How much is really real and how much is politics? I know you can't expect to answer that. I know the council.
I can give you my own opinion. I would suggest it's all politics.
It just seems to me to be somewhat of a coincidence that this has occurred at this particular time, especially when our mayor has traveled how many thousands of kilometers to come back and to champion this incredible opportunity for Sudbury. I'm very highly suspicious, and I think most of us in this community should be highly suspicious as well. And we invite everyone to come out next week for more of the same when we hear about the possibilities of the wonderful advantages we're going to have in Sudbury by having a casino and a great parking area right in our watershed that's going to distribute how many more tons of salt into Lake Ramsey. These are very important issues, and I think that they're going to have to wake up to this because this is an election year where you have a chance maybe to this time get a council that's going to respond to the needs and the concerns of ordinary citizens instead of what we're looking at in the present time, except for Mr. 12-to-1, who's right over there in the corner, who happens to be a champion for our ordinary citizens. And unfortunately, we don't see that around the rest of the council chamber. That's my political
So I've been accused of using this as a campaign issue. I can assure you, I don't campaign, I canvass. That's the way I did the last election, that's the way I'll do this election. All I was trying to do was provide a voice for the people so that you had an opportunity to see the presentation by Mr. Price and voice some of your concerns. Because as I said, or I may have said, I don't remember what I've said half the time now. And what I said earlier was the fact that a month ago, I knew really nothing about what's going on. Again, I'm going to repeat myself, but if somebody can challenge the presentation, I would like to know, because I don't want to be going around and believing Mr. Price if his information is incorrect. Yes, sir.
Just another quick point. The Greater Sudbury Watershed Alliance is holding a meeting on Monday, April 9th. Richards Lake and people from that area will also be talking about the same issue. So
if you're wanting to get further information from a different point of view, I think it's still going to be against it, but I'll be at the Lockerbie Legion at 7 o'clock Monday, April 9th.
Will that be advertised?
Yes, it will.
Just to answer John Menzies' question there about the casino will be right here, so you'll have chrome-plated chips to play with.
Yes.
Just two questions. The first one is, did staff, city staff, propose the present site?
I got to be careful here, because I said maybe I fell asleep at one of the meetings, but I don't remember where city staff has proposed that site.
So if that is the case, normally plans come from city staff. If council is not involved, the information did not go to council, why is council so hesitant to listen to a presentation in council chambers, which is the people's chambers? What is the process for getting Mr. Price to a presentation before council? It certainly cannot be a mayor that stops information from coming to council. That would be a contradiction.
I would believe that, and in the past, Mr. Price has tried to make a presentation, and unfortunately, it hasn't come to fruition. And as he alluded to, the time limit on a presentation would be 5 minutes. So it would have to be, and I'm saying this with all due respect to any of my colleagues, please. It would have to be a room like this, and they would want to come out to the meeting.
So, sorry to carry this on, but if the Coniston Alliance says we have 100 people that want to present, and each person gets 5 minutes, but they delegate those 5 minutes to Mr. Price.
We've done that. We've done that.
I
think two people designate their time to subsequent presenters. We had a public presentation.
I would, you know what, if you send me an email on that, and I'm right on the front page of the city website, I will push that to the clerk's office, because I don't want to be misleading in any of the information that I'm telling you. There's a call procedure on that. I don't know if we could give 100 places away to Mr. Price, one slide per 5 minutes.
That was actually planning.
That was for planning? Yeah. So I see some of you leaving. Thank you very much. If anybody wants to stay behind and ask direct questions to Mr. Price, please feel free to do so.
I have one. If Mr. Price would become mayor, then you wouldn't have a problem getting a presenter, would you?
Oh,